what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Joey Velez. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. His name is Dr. Mitch Abrams. So, Dr. Abrams is a sport and forensic psychologist specializing in anger management, sexual and domestic violence in sports, and then he's also the chief psychologist for the correctional healthcare facility at Rutgers University. Now, I met him back at the first ASP conference I attended when I was in grad school. So that was what, like 2018, 2019-ish. Super cool dude, super down to earth guy, and I'm really intrigued by what he does. So hopefully we can ask him some questions, learn a little bit more about not just how we got into the field, but also what he does within the field of sports psychology. So go ahead and take a listen. Hope you learned something and enjoy. Yeah, yes, indeed. I think it, now that I think about it, it might have been me in that I didn't have my AirPods hooked up to my computer.
God damn it, Joey.
As soon as you came on the second time, I was like, wait, I don't think I adjusted my headphones. But here we are,
You're just trying to piss me off. Not a good idea.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is, get right into, the spicy version of you off the top of the head.
We'll try.
How you doing?
I'm fucking tired, but
Yeah, I
I'm
bet.
never running out of work. It's funny, I was looking at the questions you sent me, what are you grateful for? I'm grateful for the fact that the world is still as fucked up as it has always been, and there's been no significant progress in decreasing violence or anything like that. So I think it's the world's strange way of making me feel needed.
I was gonna say like it keeps the income coming in, keeps the job steady.
Yeah, uh,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
but
I mean, look, you have to be careful about saying this in 2024, but I make enough money. Um,
yeah,
it, I do pretty well. So I'd like the world to be a little bit better
sure.
and make a little less money. I'd be okay with that.
Okay. Yeah, you've had your time, right? Like
Well, I'm
you've
not done, and this problem's too big for it to magically go away. I'm just saying that it's frustrating. It's like I was trying to think back how long I know you now. It's got to be
Mhm.
10 years, right?
Yeah, so I know because I know we officially met at the ASP conference in Phoenix when I was still in grad school. So that must have been like 2015, 2016.
So that's like 8 years right there.
Yeah. And then I'm pretty sure you came and did a workshop at JFK before that, right? Which is kind of how we all got introduced to you.
Yeah. Yes. So that was definitely a couple of years before. So it's got to be about 10 years.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Um, and so things are during all this time, I'm still the only schmuck who's really talking about anger in sports, which I mean, Michelle Bartlett, who's you probably know, she's down in West Texas A&M. She's been my writing buddy for
Okay.
a couple of years now. She coordinates the special interest group, Anger and Violence, in ASP with me, and her and Megan Bird are pretty much the only three that have really been writing and talking a lot about this. And I do more applied work than writing, so. I was looking at my book. It's on my desk right now. I was like, "Oh, what year was that? That was 2000 and fucking 10,
Oh,
Joey.
wow.
That's when the book came out." And Human Kinetics has demonstrated no interest in doing a newer version, and the book was
Okay.
outdated by the time it came out. So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of shit, and so I'm hoping that today what we'll be talking about is, the things that I learned since I wrote the book, because
Oh, definitely.
there's a lot uh, a lot better version of doing what we're doing and actually talking about it in a more meaningful way. So I'm hoping that this is win-win for all of us.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, typically when I have people in my field on my show, it's like we'll review some clip on social media, right? That's like a more motivational in its message, but it lacks the like how do you do it sort of thing. But I feel like, especially with what you do, I feel like it's more important to like not do that and dive into more like of how not just how you got into your field, but like why it's so important to understand the anger and domestic violence side of like what goes on within sport. Now, I sent this to you, right? But I was looking up like what job titles, right? So like sport and forensic psychologist, you have your own book about anger management in sport. You're an expert in sexual and domestic violence in sport. You're the chief psychologist at Rutgers University for their correctional healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah, so I coordinate all the mental health services in the prison system in New Jersey.
Okay. So how did you get into this route? We'll start there because, like you said, I've known you for almost 10 years. You're still the only one that really pops up when we talk about like anger management in sport. So how did you end up down this path?
Well, it also says something really bad about our field. If I'm the sole spokesman and I'm not everybody's cup of tea, we need more people talking about it. There's
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
a calmer, gentler voice, if you will. I think the truth is, as life often shows us, man plans and God laughs, right? So in some ways, I was kind of ordained for this from the time I was playing sports in Brooklyn when I was like 8 years old, and then the practical side of it all happened much later. So I was um, I was, if not the one of the poorest kids in a poor neighborhood in Brooklyn. So, and where I was growing up, it didn't matter what the color of your skin was. And in fact, as a Jewish kid there, I was the minority by far. Mostly black and Latino friends growing up.
Hmm.
But what determined whether or not you were in or out was sports. If you played sports, you were in. And once that happened, I mean, there were situations where there was a girl that I was dating, or we liked each other, and some other kid from some other town decided he was going to appear at one of my baseball games. And
Okay.
my mother is now scared shit, like, what the hell is all this? And she just sees, like, no joke, 100 black kids running to the field.
Oh
And they all
wow.
surrounded this kid and said, "You're not allowed in Starrett City ever again."
Oh man.
and, and,
What?
and they left, right? And so,
Yeah.
and it was because I was friends with all of these people because of sports. So my relationship with sports is a really intimate one from the beginning because it
Hmm.
really was life saving. I grew up with some crazy talented athletes who almost none of them did anything with their talent at all,
Yeah.
either because they were more attracted to the quick buck or they were seen as kids from the street, so they were uncoachable. Um, in fact, not a lot of kids from my neighborhood even went to college, let alone were successful. So, in some ways, the path was kind of set. But it always struck me from the beginning, because I didn't get to the anger piece until later, because it struck me from the beginning as odd that there were so many talented kids that never got where they could have gotten. And I
Yeah.
always wondered, why was that? Like, what? I mean, I was like a teenager, so I didn't formulate the question all sophisticated. Like, it was more like, why the fuck did that happen? It was kind
Yeah,
of
exactly. What's your problem, man? Like, why didn't you make it? What the hell?
well, I remember one of my best friends growing up, Milton Love. Um, I remember when I was better than him, and I remember when he passed me like I was standing still. And he took me to a batting cage when he played for the University of Miami for a couple of years, and he finished
Okay.
his baseball career at Hofstra. But I remember he took me to a batting cage, and they were it was throwing seeds. It was like 87, 88 miles an hour.
Man.
I was like 16 years old, like my hair blown back by it, and he's just pink, pink. He's hitting it all over the place, and I'm like, all right, that
Yeah.
we understand you. I am not on your level.
Yeah, this ain't for me anymore, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think everyone has a story like that.
Yeah.
But the thing was is that I was a very angry kid growing up because, and it was a real difficult dilemma because I was fortunate in that I was financially poor but family rich. I had
Hmm.
amazing parents that even though they were horrible at making money, they were very good at supporting me emotionally and basically told me I could do whatever I wanted to do. So now when you're angry at being poor and Hanukkah passes, your birthday passes, and you get no presents, and you can't be angry at the people who are emotionally supported to you, you wind up kind of being stuck with it, right? So you kind of have this simmering anger underneath. And I guess early on, I realized that I could use that for fuel.
Mm.
Um, and so um, I was going to Brooklyn College at the time. My sister died kind of suddenly. That certainly didn't make me any less angry.
Yeah.
And at the time also, I was going to Brooklyn College during the morning. I was pre med at the time, and I was working at Bally's Health and Fitness gym in the
Oh
afternoon.
yeah.
I would go from 8 to 12. I would be in classes. From about 12:30 to 10, I'd be working. As first I was a lifeguard, then I was running the pools for Brooklyn. But every day I got to the gym, I lifted and I swam a mile before I did anything, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And what was funny was, not funny, interesting, was that this was before androstenedione and steroids, precursors, right? So
Yeah.
you were either juicing or you weren't. And there was
Yeah.
a what happened was we had our own little internal competition amongst all staff. Now I'm a lifeguard now, even though I look like a middle linebacker, and I'm benching more than any of them. And
Yeah.
they're like, how are you doing that? And what I would do was, and this was even before my sister died, I would think about really shitty things that happened to me and get myself frothed up into a good rage.
Yeah.
And I'd be lifting 30, 40, 50 pounds more than I did yesterday. And I was like, holy shit, this is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Um, but I also realized that once I got myself all worked up like that, I could not be around people for a little
Okay.
while. Right. So, and then when we get to the nuts and bolts of this, it's one of the lessons learned. If you want to use your anger, you need to become so proficient with it that you can't just turn it on and turn it off because it takes time, but you can
Yeah.
shorten the time if you become proficient at it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so that's when I started to learn about the facilitative and the performance enhancement side of anger, which every athlete knows, but no
Yeah.
one's allowed to talk about. Everybody knows it. Every time I say, hey, have you ever been so pissed off that you did shit that nobody thought you could do? They go, yeah. And I go, well, why don't you do that more often? And they go, I don't know. Coach yelled at me, something like that. So we'll get to that in a little while, but that's when I realized that anger was performance enhancing. So fast forward, I get to graduate school, and I'm mentored by Eva Feinler, who at the time was the top child and adolescent anger management person in the world.
Okay.
And I said, look, I want to take your program and apply it to athletes. Now, I was at the time one of the white hat wearing do-gooders. I'm going to stop athletes from acting like assholes, right? And she goes, well, that's nice, but you need to get a sports psychologist to mentor you. I was like, sports psychologist? What's a sports psychologist? This is the mid '90s. I didn't know any sports
Yeah.
psychology, let alone right. So she says, all right, I want you to go to this conference. It was called the Play It Smart, not Play It Smart, America at Play. It was this little sports psych conference in Nassau County, Long Island. And she said, I want you to find Shane Murphy. I
Okay.
said, who? So just trust me. Find Shane Murphy. So I do a little research. Shane, besides getting his doctorate from Rutgers, was the first full-time sports psychologist for the United States Olympic Committee, right?
Ah, okay.
And he's the keynote speaker here. So I'm like, what's the chances I'm going to be in this conference with several hundred, maybe a couple of thousand people, and I'm going to find this guy and I'm going to talk him into mentoring me?
Yeah.
Not only does Shane sit right next to me, he's also a Mets fan just like me,
Oh, heck yeah.
right?
Heck yeah.
So,
Easy in
so,
right there.
so I mean, this is where someone said it's supposed to be. And when I told him what I want to do, and in his wonderful Australian accent, he said, "Great, mate. Nobody's done that." And so he officially and unofficially mentored me throughout my career, so
Wow.
that so that while I was developing these programs, I was constantly bouncing things off of Shane. And the culmination was after I got my doctorate, Shane asked me to write a chapter in his book, the Sports Psych Handbook. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Who else could
Yeah.
write it besides me? He goes, slow down. No one knows who you are. So I'm going to share you with Bruce Hale, who's a great guy, sports psychologist, was over in England and it was at Penn State Berks for a while. And we wrote it together. And by the time, shortly after the chapter was written, Human Kinetics asked me to write my book.
Oh,
So
wow.
all of this kind of just morphed very organically in a way that could never happen now, because now you're expected to have formal sports psychology training rather than back then there weren't really many sports psych programs.
Yeah.
So everybody was getting clinical and counseling degrees with mentorship and supervision. And so But that where it really turned, where it became not just about anger management in sports, but where I started getting more expertise with domestic violence and violence in general was I was actually presenting my dissertation at APA in San Francisco.
Okay.
And someone comes up to me and says, do you know something about violence? Now, at the time, I was the senior psychologist at Coney Island Hospital in Brooklyn. So I went from internship directly to a senior psych position.
Oh, wow.
Presenting this, and they said, would you like to come work in prison? And I was like, absolutely not. And then they started throwing money at me. And then I said, I'll absolutely consider.
Absolutely, I'll do it. Of course.
And I promised myself if I didn't like it, I would leave in 6 months.
Okay.
I'm going on my 25th year in the prison
Wow.
system.
Wow.
And so what working in prison taught me, because there are very similar prejudices, just in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
People think prisons are full of bad people. Hey,
Yeah.
puppy.
Yeah. Co-host likes to show up every now and then. This is Kobe.
Hey, Kobe.
Little half pity mix.
Listen, I can find a lot of people that I don't like. I don't find many dogs I don't like.
Yeah. Man, you're telling me. I keep
Yeah,
being told about how like my neighbor's dog is a complete asshole, but then every time I see it, it's super nice to me. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, right, right. So it must be the source. Anyway,
Exactly.
so the prejudice that everyone has against people in prison is that they're all a bunch of bad people. And in my experience, I've met a couple of horribly bad people, like
Yeah.
really sadistic, psychopathic, really evil people that would do whatever they needed to hurt anybody and not care. But they are the very rare exception. Most of the people in prison, men and women, are pretty good people that did some pretty bad things.
Yeah.
And I think everybody can relate to this idea that I wouldn't want to be judged. I wouldn't want my character judged on my worst day, at my worst moment, and my worst act. And in 2024, it's very unlikely when you do that, it won't be caught on camera somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
right. And so there's those prejudices, but I think that the prejudice that existed on the other side, um, and money has certainly corrupted it, is that athletes are a bunch of jerks also.
Yeah.
You know, athletes do bad things. You'll hear people talk about the dangers of competition, which is just preposterous on every level. Now, can I appreciate the idea that a football coach is making $2 million a year and school teachers and policemen are making less than about 60, 70 thousand dollars a year? Absolutely, I can
Yeah.
I can appreciate that argument. But I think people often forget that professional athletes or even collegiate athletes make the smallest percent of the total athlete population. The
Yeah.
good that people get from sports is far outweighs the bad things that happen. And the truth is, athletes are like every other population. You're going to have assholes in every group.
Yep.
Sports psychologists, there's a couple of assholes.
Yeah. Yep.
And so people will sometimes try to demonize sports and performance artists of all different types by the worst behavior of a few. And not to jump ahead because we'll get there and I'll just step on it and then come back to it, is that I think that people often forget that the athletes that people see the most are pro athletes.
Yeah.
Pro athletes should not be compared to the total athlete population. They should be compared to celebrities,
Yeah.
um, because it's a different world. They have access to different things. I talked about this in my book. I still believe this to be as true as ever. I think that narcissism is a natural consequence of chronic winning. If I beat everybody around me and people start giving me a different set of rules, I'm going to start to believe it. I'm going to start drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And then when I act that way, you blame me, which is
Yeah.
a little bit of bullshit. I think that athletes should absolutely be held accountable for their behavior, but it's not very practical to ask a 24-year-old millionaire to now start becoming accountable when everybody's told them they could do whatever they want for a long time.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it, right? Like it's a natural. I think it's a natural tendency to bleed into that or to feed into that sort of environment. You know, it's like I've never experienced this before, but yeah, now I'm given a new set of rules. I'm given all this money. Like it feels like the world's at my arsenal. Well, why would I not take advantage of it or at least try to? You know?
Joe, if I give you $10 million right now, you're going to tell me everything you would do would be nice and responsible?
You know what's funny is like the conversation about winning the lotto. I'm always like, no, man, like I would still go to work for a week, put in my 2 weeks, and then just do this and that. And then it's like, would I actually do that? Like someone gives me $300 million, am I really going to work? I'm saying, hey, screw you
Listen,
guys. Like I am not coming in.
I think that first off, the best you could get to a hypothetical question is a hypothetical answer. But the truth is, we have hedonistic tendencies, all
Yeah,
of us.
yeah,
And people will hopefully, if they were in that situation, put a bunch of it away. But surprisingly, many athletes have been bankrupted by their own greed.
yeah.
And they should have some money and they'll do stupid things that are fun and entertaining, which is fine. I mean, I remember when people were making a big deal about Michael Jordan playing golf for $25,000 a
Oh
day.
yeah, yeah.
That's like me playing a nickel a hole. I mean, right? And
Yeah,
so
and
we
then
need
even
to
in his interview, right? They're like, "Do you feel like it's a problem?" He's like, "If it was a problem, my wife would have left me. I would have sold my house. I would have sold this." He's like, "I'm still doing everything I want to do. So like, why is it a problem?"
the problem when we playing golf $25,000 a hole is that it interrupts me from going home and counting my money, which there are not enough days in my life to do. Right.
Right?
So right.
Yeah.
So I think that people don't have a lot of perspective on these things. I've often heard people say, well, Michael Jordan was one of these players that could play better angry. And I would say not having if I talk about an athlete, it means I haven't worked with him or spoken to him. So I this is my conjecture. Um, Michael Jordan absolutely could play better angry, as most people could. But most often when someone challenged him, it was like, really? You
Yeah.
coming into my yard? Now you're gonna see what I am.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't anger, it was pride. Kobe
Yeah.
was that way too. Kobe would listen. I know you didn't put the hours in that I did,
Yeah.
so I'm going to get you. And Gino Moriema talked about this as well. The great players kick the shit out of the good players when they get tired,
Yep.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's about mental endurance as well as physical endurance. So
Yeah.
that was, I guess, the well-rounded way of saying how we got here. And so I've been working in the space of anger management with athletes, um, from the youth sport through the professional levels. I haven't worked with any active Olympics. I've worked with a couple of former Olympians. But I also, over the last about 10 years or so, I developed um, protocols for assessing athletes for dangerousness, for sex offending, domestic violence, etc. And the main reason was, besides the fact that it was at the intersection of areas of expertise of mine, I was getting requests to do these,
Mm.
and there was maybe two or three people in the world that know how to do this, because it really is at the intersection of sport and forensic psych.
Yeah.
um, and so when I first developed the anger and violence sig for ASP, it was really all about anger management. And at that time, it was talking about both sides, violence prevention and performance enhancement. But it's very difficult to talk about anger and violence without also talking about trauma,
Yep.
perpetrators of violence, victims of violence, different types of violence. So, there are many roads that run out of this hub that I kind of live in.
Yeah, which I mean, I think it just gives you an opportunity to impact a lot of different like populations and different people, because of the breadth that your field or like your niche can now attack,
Yeah,
which I
but
think is pretty interesting.
it is, but it's also it's confusing
Mm,
because then you get known as the bad guy that works with bad guys.
yeah,
Right? It's like a lot of professional sports organizations and teams know about me and my work, but don't want to talk about it because, like everywhere else in society, they want to act like this problem doesn't exist.
yeah,
I use the metaphor from Jaws. You're going to ignore this particular problem till it swims up and bites you on the ass.
yeah,
So people will sometimes cosmetically put workforces together to, or task yeah, kind of task forces to study these problems, but the people at the table don't have any experience working with really violent people. So it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, I'm very proud of my work, but on the other hand, I think it just as we're finally starting to turn the corner with athletes talking about mental health issues, we're far from turning the corner in athletes talking about anger and violence issues. In fact, if you consider the things that athletes do, especially football players, rugby players, hockey players, people that work in really tight um, spaces, it's
Yeah.
somewhat amazing that they don't have higher incidents of domestic violence.
Yeah, especially yeah, because those sports like it's a constant like physical fight, right?
It's
And
their
like even
milieu. Yeah,
yeah, and you even hear people saying like even some of the great like if we're talking like NFL great linebackers like Lawrence Taylor, like Ray Lewis, they all talk about how, like you have to have a little crazy in you, to be good at that position. So it's like the sport itself lends it to anger.
absolutely, absolutely. And well, but there's an asterisk to that too, and
Yeah.
I think that this is one of the problems that a lot of athletes, if we're going to talk about football for a moment, it's one of the big problems that athletes struggle with. I'm working with a couple of football players right now. We talk about it almost every week, that they get this mixed message from their coach. They want this rabid animal, and then they jump off sides and they get set on the bench. But
Yeah.
meanwhile, nobody taught them how to adjust the flame. I mean, that's my model, right?
Okay, yeah.
Um, you a vegetarian?
No.
Me neither. So this anybody
I
who
was
gets
wondering where that
meat,
was gonna go. I was like, I don't see
yeah,
you as a
yeah, yeah.
vegetarian.
Well, all right. So I don't know if how the vegetarians might be able to take my metaphor and apply it a little differently. Maybe cooking a beet. I don't know. Um, but to me, there are a few things that make me happier than a good steak. And a good steak, and if you're going to cook it right, and I like my steak rare, but very crisp on the outside.
Hmm.
The key to that, see, I'm starting to salivate whenever I
Yeah,
talk.
me too. Yeah.
Right. The key to cooking a good steak is high heat. Okay.
Yep.
You're just not going to cook a good steak unless you're planning on smoking something or trying to, it's just not going to work unless you use
Yeah.
high. If you know how to use that high heat, you can do amazing things. That anger is high heat.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to adjust the flame, you're not going to get a good steak. You're going to get a baseball glove on fire,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so if you can't adjust the flame, if you can't adjust the anger, you're going to hurt yourself and people around you. But up until you get to that, we talk about sometimes we talk about this idea of performing up to the red line without going over it, right? Well, most people don't even know where the red line is
Yeah.
because it's different per person, it's different per skill, it's different per sport. I mean, uh, you don't imagine people on the golf course being rageful,
Yeah.
besides Gilmore, Adam
Yep.
Sandler, watch it,
Yeah.
I love
Oh
talking
yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and anger management, right? Um, but if you think about it from a very practical point of view, you're driving a ball, you need a lot of explosive force.
Yeah.
When you're putting, it's all fine motor coordination. So
Yeah.
you're talking about in the matter of, well, sometimes it could be a long time, when you're on
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
stroke, but you could be talking about in the matter of two strokes, going from explosiveness to precision. That's
Yeah.
really hard to do. Um, but that's the key, knowing where the level is, getting up to it, because at moderate levels, anger, like other intensity, makes you stronger, faster, decreases your perception of pain, decrease certainly increases your stamina.
Yeah.
And I think that if there's one thing that if people click on, they'll go, everyone in the world can relate to, is there is nothing more motivating than someone telling you you can't do it, and when your response is fuck you, watch me,
Yeah.
that's using your anger to motivate you to do that which you couldn't do otherwise. And when you're like, a great movie, Clint Eastwood movie, Heartbreak Ridge, from like,
Okay.
it was in the 80s or the 90s. And he's basically assigned to take this ragtag bunch of misfit soldiers and turn them into Marines. At any rate, he's got one guy he's being punished and he's got to run around the platoon as they're marching, and he finally falls down and collapses in exhaustion, and Clint Eastwood gets in his ear, and next thing you know, he runs up, he picks up his weapon, recon, and he starts running again. And the guy asks Clint Eastwood, "What did you tell him that got him to do it?" And he says, "I told him don't give the prick the satisfaction."
Yeah, heck yeah.
Right? And so I think that people that have competed understand that when you think that there's nothing left in your tank, there's always something left in your tank, and
Yeah.
we can prepare for that.
Yeah. So I think that brings me to my next, because we're kind of diving into your book too, because I think something that came to mind when I was thinking about what to ask you is like, yeah, how do you go about like channeling your anger in an effective way? Like, what do people need to know? Because I think you're talking about like identifying what that line is for you, but I feel like that's something often that's the difficult part, right? Is like, what is that line for me? And
Yeah.
with me, I experience it when I'm working out. Like, I notice I lift heavier when there's some anger attached to it, you
Yep.
know? I've even made that comment multiple times to my coworkers now. I get done with a lift and I'm like, man, I was lifting angry today. And I could tell because I'm pushing more weight than I was doing before.
And were
So
you proud of it? Were you proud when you're saying I was lifting angry? You weren't bashful about it. You were like, I was lifting. I was getting shit done.
yeah, oh yeah, no, I was ecstatic. I was like, okay, that's what I need to be doing. Because but yeah, I think like you kind of tie back to an earlier point, it's especially with your work with inmates, what do people see on Netflix on shows is the bad thing that they did.
Right.
When athletes make mistakes, what do we see is the mistake that they make, not the other good things that we do. So I think it makes sense why are people hesitant to talk about it is because, well, now we're just going to overlook everything
Yep.
else. Oh, this person now has anger issues.
Well, I don't think there's any emotion except maybe shame that carries more shame with it than anger. You
Mm.
ask someone, hey, why are you so angry? They don't go, well, I had a tough day. My wife gave me shit about this. I spilled coffee on myself. What's their response? I'm not fucking angry. Oh, clearly you're not angry. We
Yeah.
deny it all the time. So if you want to talk about you can't talk about the skills until you get language right first, because
Mhm.
language is how we organize thoughts.
Yeah.
So there's three things that you have to start with. There has to be agreed upon language, normalization of emotion, and identification of emotion. Because you can't do anger management if you can't identify when you're angry,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah.
and interestingly enough, nobody ever says we're going to send you to happiness management, right?
No, not at all.
And so the implication is that anger is a bad emotion. And that is just complete bullshit. It's not
Yeah.
true. It might be uncomfortable at times. I mean, look, I think one of the reasons why I found myself in this field is, now that I think about it, see, this just became a therapy session. Now that I think about it, the reason why I think I'm really good at this, even though my wife will point out when I'm not, but I think the reason
Got to
why
have a
I'm good at
balance.
this, well, yeah, she's the prologue, if you will, right? Or the,
Yep.
or the epitaph, whatever. So I think the reason why I'm good at this is that I'm able to function at higher levels of anger than most people.
Mm.
It doesn't mean I don't have a breaking point. We all get over that line. Our thought processes go to shit. I just think I'm able to go a little bit deeper into it. And I think the reason is because when I was angry, I also had a lot of support from my mom and dad. So
Okay.
that so that I was more safely able to explore the upper RPMs that
Yeah.
most people set themselves on fire with.
Yeah. You weren't
Uh,
experiencing that sense of like shame or guilt when you would
no,
experience
actually,
anger.
it's it's funny. I think a little shout out to our friend Allison Pope Rhodius. I did
Yeah.
a We Chats with her a long time ago. I think I
Okay.
was telling this story. One of my earliest um, recollections of having an anger issue. I was probably around 13 or 14 years. I was probably a little bit older, maybe 14 years old. And you know those wrought iron chairs, that the folding chairs that you only would see in WWF when
Oh
it was
yeah.
WWF, and now it's WWE. So I had
Oh
one of
yeah.
those chairs in front of me, and I was raging to some music. I don't even know what I was angry about. Could have been because I was poor. Could have been a girl. Who the hell knows?
Something. Yeah.
Adolescent rage over probably something really stupid. Anyway, so I have this chair. It's like right in front of me. We lived in a three-bedroom apartment in Starrett City, and my mom must have knocked on my door, which was closed, but I didn't hear it because the music was so loud. Just checking to see if I'm okay. She opens the door and she says, Mitch, are you okay? And she startled me. And Joey, I ripped that chair like it was a piece of paper. Right?
Oh, geez.
And she looked at me, and it was listen, my mom's been dead for a long time. I never saw her scared except then. And
Oh,
she told me
geez.
right then and then, she said, Mitch, you better get a hold of that, or you are never going to get where you could go in life.
Wow.
And so you have these times where you're fortunate enough that you get the lesson learned without the damage. I mean, the damage was to a
Yeah.
chair. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
But my mother didn't scream at me. She didn't shame me. She warned me.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I was also very fortunate. I don't remember ever getting hit by my parents. I remember wishing that my mother would hit me.
Okay.
Because the worst thing my mother could have ever said to me was, you know what? I'm disappointed in you.
Yeah.
I've been crying.
Oh,
Can't you hit
yeah. No,
me?
my dad grew up in Manhattan, so he would talk about like the same kind of thing, the family dynamics with him. Like it was worse to hear like I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed than
Yup.
like if I were to just get a beating. It's like,
Yeah, yes, please hit me.
yeah.
Right. So I remember telling Allison that story. So I think that puts me up a little bit. It makes me a little bit more comfortable. But let's get back to language, right?
Yep.
So, and interestingly, a lot of times when people come up with revolutionary things, people see the good in it and they don't see the bad. Like the positive psychology movement was I don't think sports psychology and performance psychology could not exist without the positive psychology movement,
Yeah.
because the single greatest thing that those folks contributed to was this idea of a skill-based approach, that everybody has skills, everybody.
Yeah.
And rather than just focusing on the negative, the bad behavior, let's focus on their skills and teach them how to maximize them. And that is absolutely critical. It resonates with most people. It's dear to my heart. But the other side of the positive psychology movement that I have come to hate because of how destructive it is this idea of positive emotions.
Mm.
And the idea that if you want to have positive behaviors, you have to have positive emotions. I don't know what the fuck that means.
Yeah.
What's a positive emotion? Now, if they said destructive versus constructive, I can appreciate that,
Yeah.
because any emotion can be constructive in some ways and destructive in others. In fact, when someone calls me and says, my son is having problems with their emotions, and I would say, okay, what emotions? And they would list them and say, all right, where's the good in that? Because you just hit on something before, that was really brilliant. I don't think you realized how smart it was. You were talking about how people focus on the bad thing. The hardest part about anger management is when you start getting better at it, you avoid 99% of the things that would have blown you up, and they still focus on the one time you blow up. So that's the other piece. Once you get identified as the angry person, everyone now thinks you're the village idiot. So
Yeah.
every time you act up, now you're still the asshole, and nobody sees all the work that you've done that has significantly decreased your explosivity.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's get back to language for a second. Anger is an emotion, not good nor bad.
Yeah.
Um, it has a sympathetic nervous system reaction that goes along with it, very similar to fear. In fact, physiologically, anger and fear and anxiety are nearly identical. I mean, the only
Interesting.
differences that you might find is on galvanic skin response. And the issue is, it's no surprise because it works off of the same sympathetic nervous system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the differences for anger are attack and hit it, and fear is avoid and run away. And
Yeah.
apparently, we would prefer people to be afraid and run away than attacking issues, right? Why? Well, because that's the next word that comes up that most people have wrong. Well, the problem is being aggressive.
Mm.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the opposite of being aggressive? Being passive. You ever know anybody to be successful being passive? I don't. Now, don't get me wrong. I can appreciate being strategic and having good timing,
Yeah.
but that's not being passive. Being
Yeah.
passive is
Big difference.
waiting for shit. So one of the things I advise anybody in the audience that's listening or watching this, write a book. When you write a book, you can give better definitions than what existed in the past, right? So in the old days in sports psychology, everybody said that aggressiveness had to have harming another as a primary goal.
Mm,
That's just simply not true. You
yeah.
listen to any high performer and you ask them what's the keys to your success, they'll always be talking about being aggressive. And what they're talking about is not hurting people, it's the tenacity with which you go after your goals,
Yeah.
the passion, the intensity. Now, if we want to break it down, what we're really talking about is instrumental aggression, goal
Okay.
directed aggression.
Mm.
So if I'm playing basketball, with the NBA playoffs being a good example right now,
Heck,
and
heck yeah.
being on the outside, um, if I'm driving the lane and in the process of driving the lane, I give someone an elbow and I open up their eyebrow, that's very different than someone says something about my mother and I get up and I crack them.
Yeah.
The first situation, injury may happen. An injury may happen in sport, aggressive or non aggressive. It's the
Yeah.
nature of it.
Regardless. Yeah.
But the goal was put the ball in the hole. If someone gets hurt in the process, that's incidental. It's the secondary thing. Versus the second situation, which we call reactive aggression, which is someone provokes us and we attack in response to it. Reactive aggression is connected to anger. And in fact, when we're talking about anger management, we're really not talking about anger management. We're really talking about reactive aggression prevention.
Okay. Yeah.
Because if you want to boil things down, if you increase instrumental aggression, you're going to increase performance. You decrease reactive aggression, you're going to increase performance. So now we don't have to worry about being angry per se. We need to, because aggressiveness is an adverb. It describes your behavior,
Yeah.
right? So right now you could be angry, but I don't know because there's no behavioral analog to it.
Yeah.
Um, and incidentally, for the sports psychologists that are out there that might be interested, it also creates a huge problem with studying anger, because when you see someone that engages in what we think is a violent act in sports, the next thing you're going to try to do is you're going to try to figure out what their intentions were.
Hmm.
How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some horrible injuries in sport that were complete accidents. And I've also seen some hilarious situations where people really try to hurt someone else and they miss and wind up hurting themselves, right?
Yeah.
So to kind of round out the language so that we can have something that's malleable, violence is an extreme form of reactive aggression, and sports violence is an extreme form of reactive aggression that is outside the rules of sport.
Yeah.
Please don't ask me about hockey because it gets confusing,
I
right?
was gonna say, yeah, how does that play a role in hockey now?
Well, what's interesting, it's a little bit different now, because in the old days when there were goons that played hockey,
Yeah.
they would argue that it was not angry, it was instrumental,
I can see
that they
that.
had a particular job to do. They
Yeah.
would intimidate the opponent, they would protect our guys. It wasn't because they were angry, it was goal directed. Now,
Yeah.
were there some people that had an extra enthusiasm for it? Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
But if we think about how all of this translates into anger management in sport, right? If you and I are competing and I can piss you off and get under your skin, guess what? I own you,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so, there are a lot of psychologists, sports psychologists, who argue about the immorality of trash talking, that it's poor sportsmanship. And I would say, as we used to say in the playgrounds of Brooklyn, well, you can't talk about anyone's mama, right? there, there,
Exactly. Yep.
there is a line of where it's inappropriate, but to me, if I'm when I'm working with an athlete, I tell them all the same thing. If someone is trash talking to you, you should hear it as a compliment. What they're saying is, I cannot beat this person physically. I got
Yeah.
to mental game with
I
you.
gotta try something else. Yep.
And if I can get an athlete to be Teflon, right? None of it sticks to them because after all, there's no better response to trash talking than smiling and looking up the scoreboard,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Exactly.
Right?
No
They're
words
all,
needed at that point. Yeah.
well, yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, are you still talking? watching my guy run to the end zone, you know? Um, and so people are, as Allison would often say, people are just so precious, you know, they're so fragile in all of this stuff. And I think that whether people think it's right or moral or not, trash talk happens in sports all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that it's used is to try to piss people off, to take them off their game or distract them.
Yeah.
Um, so we got sports violence, reactive aggression, instrumental aggression, anger. But it is also important to note that there are also lots of different types of violence that have nothing to do with anger.
Hmm.
Psychopaths that are violent are not angry; they're hunting. Very,
Yeah.
very different. And one of the things I was thinking, it's funny because knowing a little bit about what you do, I've worked with a couple of former snipers over the
Okay.
years. And what I've concluded is that snipers in the military are like kickers in football. They're just mentally a different group of cats.
Yeah.
It's like they're, and actually, it's funny I said a different group of cats because they're better at the stalking side of it
Oh yeah.
than the kick down the door, right? Now,
Yeah.
now imagine you have people that are tactically trying to secure a space, and they have to go from kicking down a door to now having pinpoint accuracy in a moment's notice. You want to talk about emotional flexibility?
Oh, absolutely.
Holy shit. Um, but that's why it takes a certain amount of mental toughness, if you will, to get to there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the language down. We also need to talk a bit about the normalization of anger as an emotion, right? I think that's a big issue.
Yeah.
Half the time, the people come here and I'm talking to them, or I get in a consult through Zoom or whatever, and I'm waiting for like where the big thing is, and I'm like disappointed. It's like, oh, that's it? That's what
Yeah.
everyone's all interested about? You saying I don't have a problem? No, I'm not saying you don't have a problem. I'm just saying it could always be a lot worse.
Yeah. And I see that a lot with, working with the military because now I'm working with the Air Force. It's the same thing, right? It's like they say I'm insert emotion, like I'm upset because I did bad. And it's like, okay, and
Right.
like are you expecting me to say, hey, no, be positive? Like, no, like I feel like you should. You went out there, you had this goal, you failed. I don't blame you for being upset. That's okay.
Yes.
And they're like, huh? Like that doesn't make sense. Like you should experience that.
Well, because what they're doing when they have that confusion, and society does very often as well, is they're taking in an individual behavior and extrapolating it to their character.
Yep.
You failed, so therefore you're a failure.
Yep.
And there's one way I can guarantee that you will never fail. Don't try.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't
Um,
want to fail, don't do it.
exactly right. I mean, the best way I can, when I have the best chance of getting it right, when I don't do it. Yeah, you get the answers to zero questions you don't ask.
Yeah.
Um, Blues Traveler, a band from the '90s, had a line in a song that said, "There's no such thing as a failure who keeps trying." Right? As
Yeah.
long as you get up, you get knocked down 8 times, you get up 9 times, right? Um, as long as you keep going back to the mill.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't believe in slumps at all. I think
Mm.
people talk about slumps, and it's a figment of your imagination. You're in a slump as soon as you believe that you're in a slump.
Yeah.
But what fascinates me, not so much that people get confused about slumps, because, all right, to me, it's a natural statistical variation that you make worse by believing your confidence sucks.
Yeah.
And then your confidence is down, and then you're not as loose, and then your performance goes down, right? But what's more interesting to me is how different athletes in different sports deal with slumps differently. Like
Yeah.
baseball players do all kinds of crazy superstitious stuff, like I have to take a shower in my uniform or scratch my crotch 3 times or tap
Yeah.
my head. What do basketball players do? They keep shooting.
Yeah.
Basketball players know the only way you get out of a slump is to keep shooting.
There was a clip I saw on TikTok of Gilbert Arenas on his podcast talking about like not sticking to the outcome, like basing everything you do off the outcome. He's like, "Have you gone 0 for 20 before?" No. He's like, "Have you gone 20 for 20 before?" He's like, "No." You're gonna go some fluctuation. 4 for 20 one day, 10 for 20 the next day, 7 for 20 the next day, like 15 for 20 the next day. Like if you're expecting to be perfect every single time, then like you need to get out of this business because like it's going to be a constant state of fluctuation.
And a lot of failure. I
Yeah.
mean, you fail 70% of the time in baseball. You go to the Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of the reasons why people, would love to be able to. How do I package resilience? Because that's the holy grail of performance. It's
Yeah.
getting back up. We're going a little bit away from anger, but I think it's also worth stating. I don't believe in momentum either.
Mm.
I think that people, the physics of momentum is that a body in motion tends to stay in motion, right? Um, the concept of momentum in sports rests and falls completely on the fragility of the athlete's confidence.
I would
If
agree.
you maintain your confidence when the other team took the momentum, there's going to be the opportunity. They're going to miss the shot. You're going to go up the ice and you're going to put it in the net, right?
Yeah.
So momentum only exists when you have been defeated, when
Mm.
you believe you have less chance. They went on a run. Okay. What's the magic number? Like in basketball, how far do you have to be down before the game's over?
I mean, I've seen crazier things, teams coming back from 25-30.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what happens? It's usually when the team that's winning takes their foot off the gas,
Yep.
which presents another sports psych issue: the morality of running up the score.
Yep.
Right
Yep.
now, at some point, it gets ridiculous. But I train athletes to treat first practice of the year is the same thing as the World Series. You go with the same intensity all the time. I had
Yeah.
a kid that was coming back he had a thoracic outlet syndrome. He had a rib removed, and
Oh,
so and he's a defensive end, right? And he lost
okay.
his spot in the starting spot. And I said, man, Alex, you're gonna have to give that offensive line some work. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, you lost your spot. You're gonna have to take it back.
Yeah.
He goes, what does that mean? I said, you practice how you plan to play. Let your work speak for itself. He goes, well, the coaches aren't going to like it. Well, then you have a chat with the coaches. Tell me what you
Yeah.
want me to do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to show you what I'm capable of. You're not giving me the opportunity, so I'm going to show you. You
Yeah.
want me to not knock this guy's head off? Then give me back my spot.
Yeah. Because it's also like, well, what's the alternative, right? Like, you're not playing, you lost your spot. Like, what's the worst that could happen? It's like,
Yeah, I mean, so long as you're not, it's like the whistle's blown, you pulled off your teammate's helmet, and you hit him with it. I think
yeah,
that's
no,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
But a clean rep, you bull rush the guy fucking 15 yards past the quarterback. You made your point,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm here to play, and I believe that athletes need to do the best they can. And it's crazy because it sounds like it's a contradiction, but it's not. I want athletes to be able to maximize their intensity without shooting their shot too early.
yeah,
Okay, so um, so we talked about validating emotions and the
yep,
normacy of it. And it's also about the issue of being able to identify how you feel. And this is something that I learned the hard way. When I first started with this, I was like, we have to teach athletes how to recognize they're angry. And the easiest way to do that is to teach them all the physiological changes:
hmm,
heart rate, breathing rate, muscle tension, right? All the things we do to indicate sympathetic nervous system activation. Now, that's fine when I'm teaching them anger management skills in my office. But if they're going to use that as the cue of when they need to calm themselves down, all that shit happens naturally when you're in competition. In fact, I would say that the quality of my anger management work was probably only about 50 or 60% of what it is now for about 10 years of my career.
wow,
Because I
interesting,
didn't appreciate that nuance that they were looking for cues to know when they're angry, and what they were
yeah,
looking for was putting them in the wrong direction. And what I realized, what you have to look for, because you can't rely on your body, is you have to look for the changes in the cognitive set. When
mm,
you're more interested in executing your opponent than executing your plan, that's when you know you got to tap out. You're too hot.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, you hear about it all the time, like the difference between being nervous and being excited. Like the physiological response is the same. It's how you interpret it.
That's
So if you're,
exactly right. We want
yeah,
the
so
butterflies to fly in formation.
Yeah, so if you're looking for those specific like body physiological cues, sometimes I can give you like a misrepresentation of like what you're actually experiencing.
That's right. And so where I think that body work is really helpful is it starts to normalize things, right?
Mm,
People are more likely to talk about anxiety than anger. And so just as when they worry about, oh, I got butterflies in my stomach, I'm all shaky, you say, no, no, that's okay. That means your body's getting ready to work. Same thing
yeah,
when they start to notice this in their body with anger. This is a good thing. The issue is not getting angry. The issue is getting too angry. And
yeah,
so I want you to know that that's your body saying, hey, I'm ready to go. Because the truth is, your body and your brain doesn't have the sophistication to know that this is just a simulation.
yeah,
For your mind, it's acting as if this is life or death. So it's
yeah,
activating for that. Um, so the next step then is you have to start building a toolbox of what you can use to just turn it down a little bit. I'm not asking for you to do, downward dog on the free throw line. I just need you to turn the heat down a little bit so your brain re-engages.
yeah.
And
And I
and
think
so, go ahead.
I think that's a big thing I talk about with people too is like the whole point of what we do sports like regardless of what your niche is, it's not to get the anger, the anxiety, the stress from a 10 out of 10 down to a 0. Like that's impossible. If you
And
knock that
counter
thing down.
productive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because like I work with pilots all the time and they're like, "Oh, I'm nervous going into a flight." You should be. Like that's a very expensive piece of equipment, and if you crash, like, you're dead, so, like, you probably should be a little bit stressed out, I get that, but if I can just get you to go from a 10 out of 10 to, like, a 9 out of 10, maybe that's what you need to be able to put your next
Yeah,
foot forward, you know?
absolutely. I remember I was working with like a 13-year-old gymnast who broke her neck. Now
Ooh,
it sounds dramatic.
yeah.
It was as benign as it was one of the little vertebral processes.
Okay.
Right? So it sounded, but nonetheless, still a broken neck, right?
Yeah.
So she gets cleared and she's having understandable anxiety about it. And she comes to work with me and she goes, Doc, I'm scared. I was like, Tiff, have you ever watched yourself? Like you're doing that up there. Gravity is a law. If I was
Yeah.
in the air at that time, I would think when I land, this is gonna hurt. Right? You've done this so many times that you've
Yeah.
forgotten how skilled you are at this. But the idea that you're worried that you're way up there, you might fall, you might hurt yourself, that's completely logical.
Yeah.
At this
Yeah.
point right now, you are like everybody in the world. The question is, do you want to be like everyone in the world, or do you want to be the best version of yourself?
Yeah.
And if you want to be the best version of yourself, you accept the fear and you do it anyway. And I
Yeah.
often spend a lot of time differentiating between fear and anxiety, right? Fear is
Yeah.
when there's a real danger, anxiety is when you perceive it. So the
Yeah.
example I use is if you're on a boat and you see sharks in the water and then you start to see blood in the water and you start to have that scared response and right, but you're on the boat.
Yeah.
That's anxiety. Fear is if you're in the water,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
when someone's afraid of it, yeah, I get it. You're a pilot. I mean, the FAA is the only organization that rewards people for ratting themselves out.
Ah.
You know that? What because the FAA knows that when there's a crash, almost always there's a dead body, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
we want to learn everything we possibly can learn about how crashes happen,
Yeah.
including you telling us your mistakes and near misses. Although I never understood why it's called a near miss. It's really a near hit. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they encourage people to tell on themselves because they rather than shame, they want to study the mistakes
Yeah.
so that they can ameliorate them.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I spend a fair amount of time watching film with athletes I work with. Right?
Okay.
Tell me where you think you did something wrong, and we're watching. I'm like, that looks like a perfect rep. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And then they tell you what was in their head that was different from the performance, and you go, all right, now I see where the disconnect is.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want people to have a good skill set, and we talk about all types of things, right? Breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, music. Well, obviously you can't use that inside competition, but
Yeah.
music is tremendously powerful. to help adjust moods for both to amp people up and to relax them a little bit. Um, Distraction techniques, a little imagery and visualization, use of visual cues and regrounding and centering techniques. The point is that I want them to have such a full toolbox and they practice it so much that on cue they could turn it down a little bit.
Yeah.
So then they also have to learn trigger recognition. What are my buttons that people push? Um, Prediction of consequences. Guess what? You could yell at the ref all you want. They're not going to change the score, the call. And there's a good chance that you're going to get either a technical or the next three calls against you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus how you joke around with refs or umps and find the humanity in all of it, and then they give you a give back call later on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like I don't know, because hearing you talk, I think I don't want to say that's where we miss in the field, but I think we're so quick to like jump to a solution or a skill that you need, and we don't take the time to like build that self-awareness. So even in the three things you said, like the first two are just like let's build self-awareness on like what this thing is first.
Yep.
Like what does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? Because if you can't do those things, no matter what skill I give you, it's probably not going to do anything for you.
And was there anything that I said, Joey, that was rocket science?
No.
Right. It's all intuitive stuff. And this is kind of the worst kept secret about this whole thing.
Yeah.
I am not reinventing the wheel. I'm saying things that almost every person and athlete can go, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And then go, all right, well, good. Now that you understand it, let's master it. And
Yeah.
I think that the single greatest reason why people have problems with anger is because they don't acknowledge it, they deny it, they don't do anything about it. And by the way, any anger management program has to have an evaluate and modification part of the show, right? You're not going to get it right all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes we use these things called hassle logs, just cards that we have them use as homework assignments. Give me the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the situation. What went well? What didn't? What could you do differently next time? Because if we set it up that, and I'm a big believer, and something that you alluded to before, with Arenas talking about focus on the process and the product will take care of itself. I'm a big believer in fixing the process rather than damning yourself for the process being a little bit off.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want you to be the best person ever. I want you to be better than you were yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. How do I make those small incremental changes in myself? Because then like the result will come, right? But like even still, like oftentimes that's still out of your control, right? So it's like, yeah, how do we master just being the best version of who we are and then just see what else happens?
It sounds so hokey, but it really boils down to acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does. I mean, look, when Milton Love passed me like I was standing still, I could have worked as hard as I possibly could. I was not going to catch him. That was fact. I can accept that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I won't take his knees out. I'm just kidding, Milt.
Yeah. Yeah, he better watch himself.
Right,
Uh,
exactly. So,
it's fu-
so
it, it's funny because I had that moment too playing basketball. Like growing up on the West Coast, I was 6 feet tall, but I played center. Fine in high school, but then when I got to college or junior college and I tried to do that, I was like, "Oh, you're six
right,
nine? Nope,
yeah.
I'm
But
out."
you remember when I was going to be working on my handle? Probably want to go back in time and
Yeah,
a little
exactly.
of that.
Yeah, exactly. I was a 6 foot center with no handles, and I could barely shoot the three. It's like, oh, this ain't gonna work at the next level.
Yeah, but at least you used to hanging and banging underneath the hoop, though.
Oh yeah, man. I held my own. Like
Yeah, but you're still dealing with someone who's, if they're 9 inches taller than you, their reach is probably 2 feet taller than you. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I'll do what I can, but man,
yes, yes.
But yeah, I think
Uh,
that those are the two things that like I've noticed myself starting to not preach, but starting to discuss more with people. Is one is like developing a little bit of acceptance, but then also like the normalization of what you're experiencing. Because if I trying to change like, oh no, don't feel sorry for yourself, do this. Like, no, like I think that's okay. That's a natural reaction, but like how do we now move forward with it?
right, but I think what you just said just needs a little bit of a wrinkle, which is being sensitive to when someone is too hard on themselves and why.
Yeah.
That could be a trauma history. That could be an abusive coach at a formative time in their life. I agree with what you're saying, but there are times that people, because they're people, they come with baggage.
Yep.
And so sometimes they have tendencies that are self-destructive that you need to be sensitive to. I think that one of the reasons why athletes are at high risk for mental illness and psychological problems is because people presume that they're not. That because you're physically healthy, it means that you're mentally healthy.
Yeah.
And I mean, is there a relationship between physical health and mental health? Yes. Is it foolproof? No.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be mindful of both sides of it. If you're working with high achievers, I think that one of the things that high achievers often work to do is to try to hide to the world any blemishes because they have to keep up this image.
Yeah.
And that's when you say, all right, that's fine. You're not out there. You're in here with me now. So let's talk about what that skeleton is that you're worried about popping out in the wrong time. Like I'll sometimes joke when I'm working with an athlete, say, listen, I have one weakness. And they want to hear what it is.
Yeah.
I'm fucking telling you. That's a poor survival strategy. But my wife would be able to tell you that that one weakness has 15 chapters, and each chapter has like
Yeah.
175 pages, right?
uh,
And so I think that if you have the courage to own your emotions, including your anger, and examine where it comes from and master it, I mean, God knows when people are able to harness their anger, they're able to do shit that the average person can't. And I think
yeah.
there's a lot of athletes and performers in general that leave a lot of money on the table because they're afraid to go to that angry place for the risk of the bad outcome. But what I think about is, Bobby Knight might have single-handedly given me my career by being such a tyrant, right? He, so he'd be yelling at his players, hitting him, throwing shit, and all the rest of that stuff. And it was interesting because you didn't see a lot of his athletes acting out. That's one of the
Yeah.
things that I always worry about, right? When you have a coach that's pissed off that their athlete is angry, but meanwhile the coach is a tyrant, and it's like, of course he's acting that way. He watches you, right?
Yeah.
So there's a moral to the story with Bobby Knight's approach, right? So Bobby Knight, as good as he was, did not have a lot of pros. Why? Because when you use fear as a motivator, you get your athletes to work like robots. And if
Hmm.
you have a good system, which he did, he was, he
Yeah.
was not the originator, but he was an innovator with the motion offense.
Yeah.
He would dance X's and O's around most people, right?
Yeah.
And so for him, he wanted his players to be exactly where he wanted them to be and do exactly what they wanted. And in his system, they did pretty well. But guess what? That doesn't work for elite performance.
Yeah.
Elite performance is when you have the balls, the creativity, and the courage to do shit that most people wouldn't even think is
Yeah.
possible. They wouldn't even consider it. And so I want athletes playing with their hair on fire, high confidence, not reckless. Don't take stupid shots. Don't, you run into the paint and there's all four guys waiting for you. You're selfish and stupid, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you have the step on someone and everybody's going to get the outside shooters, you hit the gas.
Yeah.
You floor it and you put the ball in the hole. And
Yeah.
I want athletes to have the confidence to know when to have that. And it's like, do you remember racing games that used to have the nitro button?
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Anger is that nitro button,
Okay. Yeah. I like that.
right? And so if you time it right, you're going to get to the finish line before anyone else. You're
Yeah.
going to get to the loose ball. You're going to get to so it's really a matter of maximizing and by the way, this is all of this that we're talking about. We didn't even get to domestic violence and sexual assault.
I know, man. I was just thinking that, right? Like I didn't. We've been talking about a lot, but we didn't even cover half the things that we originally said that we're going to
Sounds
go
like we're going
over.
to need a volume two there, Joey.
Proud. I was gonna say, yeah, because I don't want to keep it too long. Because like I don't know, I think that was a lot of good stuff talking about like anger, and like I think even hearing you talk about it, I realize just how much it shows up in my life, like in an effective way, right? Like especially when I'm working out. But I think yeah, just the way people interpret anger, aggression, all these sort of things. I think in order to make that the change, how do we now change the narrative on that? How do we use that in a more effective way? Well, it starts by like identifying what it actually is. and
Yes.
clarifying what that terminology is because, yeah, there are situations where anger turns into, like you said, more of that reactive aggression when it's bad. We don't want to see that, right? Like that doesn't show the whole story.
Exactly. And there are times that things can be both instrumental and reactive. And the other thing that we were saying before, once someone is identified as the violent athlete, it's very hard to shake that.
Yeah.
Refs are quick with the whistle,
Yep.
coaches are quick to pull you. Um, and I think that where it's really interesting to me, Joey, is that you see this stuff pop up mostly in college sports, and the reason I think that is because a lot of athletes have enough physical talent that they could dominate everybody through high school.
Yep.
Then when you get to college, everybody's good. And the difference then becomes the mental side of the game.
Yep.
Um, and so, I mean, anger management in sport just covers so many different areas. I mean, it's communication, it's
Yep.
talking to coaches, it's getting what you want out of coaches, it's coaches learning how to deal with their own anger. I mean, so refs, everybody hates them, so they need anger management.
Yeah. They could
Coaches,
do nothing right,
yeah, coaches, their whole career is based off of what other people do.
Yeah.
Could you be more vulnerable? I mean, you want
Oh
to be
yeah.
pissed off? I recruited these all world talents. They don't do a goddamn thing I tell them to do, and I'm going to lose my job because of it.
Yep.
Well, yeah, well, this is what you signed up for. Well, okay. I don't blame you for being pissed at them, but how are you going to get what you want out of
Yeah.
it? I guess another place that this pops up is when coaches use exercise as punishment. Man,
Mm.
that pisses me off. I hate that. Hate that. Oh yeah, you jumped off side, so you're going to do laps. All right. Let's just accept that anything that's training related, whether you're having them run suicides, push-ups, more batting practice, any of these things are geared to improve performance.
Yep.
You don't reward bad behavior with that.
Yep.
For athletes, coaches, listen up. For athletes, their air is participation. Their air is playing. You want to teach them a lesson? Guess what? You made too many mistakes. Now you need to sit and watch. Because if I'm sending you to run, I want you to have more stamina. If I'm giving you push-ups, I'm saying I want you to get stronger. I'm trying
Yeah.
to change this behavior.
Yeah.
The best way to change the behavior is to take the air out of their lungs, sit and watch, learn, and we'll teach you how to do this better.
Yeah. And I think now even with that, when you get into like, sources of motivation, if every time I'm getting in trouble, you're just telling me to run, at some point I don't care. Like the punishment doesn't do it for me because I know I'm still gonna play.
Well, that's the holy grail behind everything, right, Joey?
Yeah.
So if at the end of the day you're so talented that the coach will turn around and they'll act like they're punishing you and they're angry at you, but you're still starting, there's no suspension, you're playing first snap of the game, what are you communicating?
Yeah.
And it's like I'm sure you've seen because everybody's been watching this over and over again. Gino Auriemma's speech about the premium that he and his coaching staff put on body language. Have you seen this?
I think I've heard him talk about it, yeah.
If you haven't, it's beautiful because what he was talking about is how hard it is to find the enthusiastic athlete these days,
Mm.
right? Everything is me, 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 me. All they care. I didn't score, so who cares? He
Yeah.
says we put a premium on body language, and if you're like falling asleep on the bench, you're not cheering your teammate on, you're not happy when the team is successful, you will never see the court. Now he said now, I know what most people are going to say. You can do that because you have, five more five-star recruits. And he said, yeah, that's true, except I would rather lose than see how some of these kids play.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing from sports. I mean, I think that athletes don't know how to celebrate their successes enough. There's not as much, I was going to say boyish, but it could be girlish or these days, whatever gender you are, that childhood enthusiasm of loving the process. I mean, anybody who shits on competition has never had the experience of standing over someone that they dominated and knows how good that feels.
Yeah, I think
And
so. Yeah.
so there's a lot of good to be had there. And I think that the bad side of it is it gives, well, it's good and bad. It gives sports psychologists a lot of business. Um, but when they're in high school and college, you could argue it's too late.
Yeah.
A lot of this foundational stuff needs to be done at the youth sport level. I was given, Kristen Deffenbach is she's huge in coaching education,
I don't
and I
think
was
so.
giving
No.
her a hard time a couple of years ago. I was like, why are you still necessary? like coaches should like want to be educated. And she
Yeah.
turned and looked at me and she goes, yeah, I was thinking the same thing about you. And I was like,
Oh, yeah,
but no,
touche.
but that's exactly the issue. I want to see coaches trying to become better. I want to see athletes trying to be better. I want to see humans trying to be better. I want to see
Yeah.
parents trying to be better. There's a reason why the average age of kids dropping out of sports is 13.
Yeah.
We're making it so that it sucks. And
Yeah.
instead of it being fun, I mean, being a student athlete is a full-time job. So
It is. Yeah.
I warned you, Joe. You get me started, I'll keep talking for hours unless you stop me.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's put a pin on it because I definitely want to do a volume 2 so we can get more to the other stuff, But hey, look, I appreciate you coming on. This was awesome.
My pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a while. I still remember, playing pool the one night of the Ask conference. I never forget that night. It was super fun. I actually met my ex-girlfriend there at that night. So, you're part of my life now because of that.
Was that a good experience for you or a bad experience?
It was good at the time. Yeah, it was good
Okay.
at the time. It didn't work out in the end, but I wouldn't
I
turn it
don't I
back.
don't remember who it was. I don't know if it was Brandon or Manu,
It might.
Jake. Trying to remember who it was who said you won't get up there and do push-ups. I was like, all right.
Oh man, if I had to guess, it was Brandon. That sounds like a Brandon thing. I miss those guys. That was a good time.
Yeah,
Uh, well, I want to get you out of here on this, right? So, like, I know you probably mentioned it already, but what is a word of advice you have people who are listening to this in terms of like, not necessarily how do I go about controlling my anger better, but like, what's one thing you want to leave them with that they need to know moving forward?
first, it's almost never as bad as people are accusing you of. Second, you owe it to yourself to be the best version of yourself. And in
Mm,
order to do that, you got to own your emotions, including your anger. So
yeah,
learn how to adjust the flame, use your anger to perform as best you can, and recognize that when it's time to adjust the flame, you want to do that because you don't want to hurt people around you. You don't want to hurt yourself, and you're trying to do your best job. Um, I don't think there's anybody in the world that can't relate to sometimes I was pissed off and I wish I didn't do that.
yeah,
And I make no bones about the fact I do not like to apologize.
yeah,
So I work real hard to try to avoid having to apologize, but no one's that good. You're
yeah.
gonna fuck up. We all fuck up. Accept it, own it, adjust the flame, do better next time.
Yeah, you want to cook that good steak. You don't want something coming out well done or burnt. Like we don't need that.
That's exactly right.
Well, hell yeah. Well, I appreciate you. Where can the people find you?
Um, Easiest way, Twitter at Mitch Abrams PSYD, PSYD. My website is drmitchabrams.com or abramspsychservices.com. And my Gmail address is mitchabramspsyd at gmail.com. So I'm not hard to find. I tend to be pretty opinionated.
Hell yeah.
And if you disagree with me, great. I'd love to argue with you about it.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Challenge accepted to everybody listening. Get on Twitter and find it.
That's
Well,
right.
look, yeah. Yeah, so appreciate you having me on. We'll definitely get a volume 2 down the road for sure. But
Huh?
always thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody listening. Go ahead and like, share, rate, review on all the platforms. Have a good rest of everybody's day. And today's a great day to make an impact. So might as well start now. All right. We'll catch you later. A little technical difficulties, but hey, that's part of doing things on Zoom, you know? If I had all the money in the world, I would just fly him into my house, fly him into my studio. But, alas, here we are. Yeah. I've really learned to use that term a lot. Alas, I don't know why. I think I heard a comedian say it. I think I heard it in some medieval movie, but I don't know. I think it's hilarious. And I'm joined by a fly today, apparently. Jeez.